Good morning. Many thanks for joining our webinar today. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Richard Bates. I'm Sales Director and co-owner for EBS. Ultimately, we pride ourselves on being your experienced technology partner. And today we're joined by Steve and Nikki from Sicon. And Steve's going to be doing a demonstration of the purchase to pay process within Sage, utilizing Sicon's add-ons. For those of you that don't know EBS, we've been established over 40 years. We're a long-standing partner of Sage and Sicon, and ultimately we offer an end-to-end solution, which is Sage and also the cloud and managed services that go around it. Before we proceed and I hand you over to Steve, a couple of housekeeping points. We are recording the session today, and we will be publishing it onto our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to share that with any colleagues that might be interested in this. Obviously, if there are any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, or there'll be an opportunity to unmute at the end and ask those. Right, without any further ado, I'll pass you over to Steve, and let Steve run through the session.
That's great. Thank you, Richard, and thank you everybody for joining the session today. So let's just start and see if we can ensure the technology is working. First, so hopefully, Richard, you can see my screen with the mouse indeed sort of moving around. Right, now what I am going to do is, nobody wants to see me in the corner, so I'm going to turn my camera off so we can focus just purely on the demonstration. So, as Richard said, we're going to go through the procurement lifecycle, purchase to pay. But just before we start, brief introduction to Sicon. For those of you who perhaps haven't heard of us, we are a Sage technology partner, or Tech Partner Plus actually now. Essentially, we are accredited by Sage to create add-ons for Sage 200. We only develop for Sage 200, and it's something that we've done for in excess of 20 years. This portfolio here, we've got a lot of products. The ones that we're going to focus on today are a couple from our approvals module and also our documents and document automation. I'll explain what they are shortly. In terms of follow-up, feel free to visit the Sicon website. We've got our help and user guides here, and if you click on, for example, documents, there's screenshots and descriptions of the various features, so very transparent from there. Okay, so what exactly are we going to go through today? Well, in terms of the purchase to pay, a lot of you on Sage 200 at the moment, you might have a paper-based requisition process. Somebody's then keying the purchase order on. At some stage, you might goods receive, so somebody's notifying you. Invoice comes in, you'll probably check it off, send that piece of paper around the office to get the approval before you then put it on the system. And you'll either put it in a filing cabinet, or you might scan it in and attach it. Now, what we're looking to simplify that process and really devolve the responsibility by utilizing technology. So from a Sicon Approvals, this is a web portal that wraps around Sage 200. You don't have to be a Sage user. We have our own named user licenses, and it means that an employee can raise that requisition. It can then go through the pre-configured approval route before creating the purchase order in Sage, so saving that touch point. There's an option to goods receive. Again, you can still goods receive within Sage, or you might not need to GRN. It depends on yourself. Once the invoice comes in, again, we've got a couple of options. You could still process that manually. Alternatively, this is where Sicon Document Automation comes in, so OCR type technology, where we can read the information off the PDF invoice. You're still in control. You can process that through, and then that invoice can come back out to the web portal here in Approvals for it to go through another approval route before being released to pay. So there's a lot more elements in there, but that's essentially the flow that we're going to go through today. So Sicon Approvals, this is the login here. Now, just in terms of the look and feel, I'm actually going to start and log in as the admin user. So just to give you a bit of an idea of a look and feel. So as you log into the web page, down the left-hand side, we've got the modules that are available. And it's important to say that Approvals is modular. So you purchase the appropriate modules that are relevant for your particular project, but you can add modules in future. So as I said, we're going to be focused on requisitions and invoice approvals from this side, but you could add expense management and approvals. We've got timesheet capture, which works perfectly with Sicon projects, holidays, and HR and absence as well. So again, different modules, but those that you haven't purchased won't appear in the menu. We've got the dashboard area here, which, for example, I've got some notifications of items that we need to approve, and I can quickly click on those there. Top right hand corner, I've got my user settings, and I can do things like turn on and out of office. We'd have a predefined alternate user, and this is great for enabling the processes to still carry on when people are on holiday or off sick, whatever that would be. So in terms of this, by selecting alternate user, anything sent through to myself will be redirected to that person in my absence, and they can then action those requests. Upon my return, anything they've not actioned moves back into my queue. We've also got functionality within here, such as delegate. Now, again, it's down to the configuration, but this particular user that I've logged in, they've got a list of other approval users here, which they can assume control of without having their password. So what I mean by that is I could pick Corey Robinson, and I'm actually now logged in as Corey, and I could approve items on Corey's behalf. I could raise a requisition, for example. I can't stitch Corey up. It will say Steve Gemmell has approved on behalf of Corey Robinson, but the whole idea here is we want to keep this fluid, but actually utilize technology. The last thing I would say, and we're not going to cover this today, but if your user's got access to approvals in the web, we've also then got mobile. We've got an iOS and an Android app, no extra cost. You do have to have your system external facing. Again, that's something Richard and the team can talk through with you in more detail. But essentially, you download the app, and then you enter this unique endpoint address, and then you log in with the same details. And you can't do everything in the mobile app that you can within the web portal, but again, approving requisitions, that sort of thing. It's just taking away those excuses of, oh, I'm not in the office. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to log out as my user. I'm going to start with a user called Sandra. So Sandra is my requisitioner today. Now you'll notice the menu on the left-hand side has changed ever so slightly. And there are two options for requisitions. There's the standard requisition, so I know what I want to buy, I know who I'm going to buy it from, and I just need that signed off. But for those of you perhaps with a more procurement type process, or with your end users going, I really don't care where we buy it from, we've also got this option called project requisitions. Now I will come back to that a little bit later. I'm just going to go through the standard one and we'll work through the cycle, but this one's a really interesting option for a lot of organizations. Whilst it does have a separate database for your user login details, etc., what we're actually doing is pulling and reading information from Sage where we need to. So we're going to start with a requisition. So we'll click on create new requisition here. And the idea with the approval system is, whilst there is a database behind it, SQL database for storing settings, etc., there's a lot of information that we're pulling from your live database. So for example, here, this list of suppliers is coming from my live Sage company. If we were to add a new supplier in Sage, if I was to refresh or next time I log in, that supplier will be here. Now, I'm actually going to use a supplier called Ernie Swinton today. And as I pick on Ernie Swinton, the supplier's address, default contact details are all read from Sage and pulled through. Delivery addresses, I've got a number of different options. And again, these can be switched off. They are global settings. So you can have multiple approvals addresses, and you can default one to a user as we've got here. It might be that I'm going to pick it up from the supplier. So we could select a supplier. We've got the option to select a sales ledger account address. So we've got clients who will send parts to site for their engineers, for example. For those of you using Sicon projects, then we can, and you've got a project address, we can pull that through. And there's also an option for free text addresses. Obviously, if you're not using Sicon projects, then that option wouldn't be available. Then we come down to what options can I add? Well, basically, it mirrors what you've got in Sage. So for those of you using stock items, as we click on a stock item line, I can then do my search. If I pick my good old espresso machine, I'll say my warehouse, it's actually pulling again those stock records from Sage. So things like if I say, yep, we want one of those. Actually, I'm going to say we need 3. We want 3 of those today. It's pulled through the buying price. And it's also pulled through our nominal as well. And again, if you're using Sicon projects, we could select that there. I'm actually going to also add some cups onto the system today. So I can turn off my filter there. We'll pick our espresso cups again for the warehouse, and we'll have 5 cups. That'll do. And again, I've got my prices as we pull through. I could add free text lines on there if I wanted to. Again, just as it works in Sage, the only difference with a free text line is the user will have to select a nominal code. Now, the way we get around this is a couple of options. You can either have it locked down, as my particular user is here. You could give them access to all of the nominals, or what most customers do is they will truncate that list. So the user has 5 or 6 nominals that they can select. And what you can see here is, whilst we've got the nominal there, which doesn't make any sense to me or most users, the fact you've got the description. So we use this in-house, and I've got options such as it could be office equipment, etc. You could add comment lines. You could even add delivery charges. The charge lines are pulled through from what you've got set up in Sage. We've then got options for justification. Now, just before we come into the justification, there's also this one I tend to point out as well, which is the urgent flag. Now, we can't control somebody ticking this, but and you know, it just is. That's probably not a valid reason, but it is an important feature. So in the background of the system, the whole ethos of this is approvals, hence the name. So it's sending it, and it can be multi-level. We've then got notifications that will be sent out, email notifications that will be sent out to the user to notify them there's items to action. Now, typically at an operational level, you want those going out hourly, so people are actioning them quickly. But as you move up to a more senior level, typically they don't want to come back to 40, 50 emails. So there's an option where we can just send it once a day, and it will just group everything that needs to be actioned into one list. The urgent flag, you can configure that so it will overwrite that and send it immediately. It's also going to highlight that it's urgent. But as I said, we can't control somebody ticking it. That's down to you then as part of your processes to say to people, only tick this in this instance. Mention justification, so we can add things further. Need for the new kitchen. That might be a justification, even down to attaching files. So perhaps you've got a quote or something, so we can just simply drag and drop. In fact, I'll take that one there. We can just drag and drop whatever that attachment is and store that. Options include order justification. So even controlling if the order is the requisitions over £3,000, you must have 2 attachments. So there's lots of things that you can set up and configure. Keep it simple would always be my recommendation. So there's just a basic requisition. We've also got this audit trail here, so we can see as Sandra adds items, modifies, she creates, etc. So we've got all of that tracking. At the bottom, I've got some options. I could copy a previously approved order. I can even email out a quote request. So as I select this, we've got a layout. You can put your logo on there as well. But if I click at the top here, I can email that supplier that I've selected, and it will send it as a PDF attachment. Alternatively, we can use the BCC, and I could send it to a couple of other suppliers just to get their best quote. Save only will sit as a draft, and save and submit will go out for approval. So I mentioned earlier about the approval options, and there's quite a lot. Now, typically most customers will approve based on nominal. So anything for, and grouping probably by cost center. So anything for our sales cost center, any nominals linked to that will go to Nikki. Anything for operations would go through to Darren, for example. That can be multi-level, and we can also then add in approval amounts. So anything for sales, as I mentioned, goes through to Nikki. Nikki can approve up to £1,000. If it's less than that, as soon as Nikki approves it, it will then update into Sage. If it's more than that, it still goes to Nikki, but then we'll continue up the chain until such time as somebody's got the appropriate approval value. We can do it purely based on supplier. So supplier A will go through route 1, supplier B will go through route 2. We can do it on value. So anything up to £1,000 goes down this route, 1,000 to 5,000 goes down a different route. We can do it based on requesting user. And again, for those of you using Sicon projects, we can do things like the project manager or sort of project specific. Again, my recommendation would always be keep it simple, but you can get fairly complex with it should you need to. My approval route today has gone to Corey. So Corey's received an email. There's a link in the email that Corey can click on, and it will take him through to the web page, but he can't approve from the email. 2 reasons: 1, security, and 2, there's a lot of information we want him to absorb. So Corey logs in, and you can see here there's got different HR notifications as well. And at the top here, I've got some links, so I can click on the link here. I could have gone into the menu, into approve on the left-hand side there. And as we go through, we can then see a list of requisitions that require Corey's approval. And just at the bottom here, there's the one I set up for Ernie Swinton with today's date. And there's a series of flags. So this tells me it's over budget. We'll come back to that shortly. I can see that Sandra clicked on the quote request button. There's the urgent flag. My justification, there's attachments, and then I can see all of the lines. Now, the reason I think this is important is it is wholly possible for a single requisition to go to multiple people at the same time. And those people will only see the lines to approve that are relevant for their approval route, but by hovering over this, you can see the rest of the requisition. It's only once everybody approves it will it then flow through to Sage. Now, if I just expand this option here, we can see we've got the 2 lines on there. I can see the nominal, I can see the values. If I go to my attachments and I view the file, we can see whatever that attachment was, some barcodes, that's always nice. I can see the justification notes. And then we get to budgets. So I'll focus a bit more on budgets when we get to the invoice approvals. But for those of you who utilize Sage's nominal budgets, it's possible for approvals to read those and then compare the month, the year to date, or the annual budget. Again, giving real-time view of that information. And likewise, we've got one for project budgets as well. Now, where it's over budget, it is again possible in the approval routes to configure that where it's over budget, it needs the managing director's approval. So regardless of the value, as soon as the last person in the chain who has the appropriate approval limits approves it, it would then go to the MD. And in fact, we've actually got some clients where it goes out to 5 board members, and so long as 2 of them, any 2 approve it, it will flow through. So hopefully getting an idea here of some of the flexibility. But as I say, we will look at the nominal budgets a little bit later. So at this point, what options do I have? Well, I can approve or reject individual lines. If I reject, I have to give a reason why, and that would go back to Sandra. Now, it might be that we're happy to sign off one espresso machine, in which case Sandra could make the change, resubmit it, and it would carry on through. Alternatively, no, you're happy, you can have the cups, but not the machines. If Sandra deletes that line, because the rest of it's been approved, it would automatically jump to where it is. I'm just going to simply approve all today. So at this point, Sandra's getting an email to say it's been approved by Corey. If it needs to go further up the chain, then that person in the approval route would receive an email, keep doing the same until such time as it's been fully approved. And at that point, Sandra receives an email to say it's been fully approved. And when she logs in, come to show existing here under approved, we can then see there's our approved requisition. Now at this point, we've now got a PO number of 4110. And if I go into Sage 200 and I'll just refresh my list, there it is. There is my PO for 4110. And if I just view the PO in Sage, you'll also get this extra approvals order tab, and we can then see who it was requested by and the unique ID if we need to find the information in Sicon Approvals. Now at this stage, my system is configured to goods receive, but before that, there is an option to enable Sandra to send out the PO. And just as we had with the work request, we've got an option where Sandra can automatically email that from within the system. Now, that bit's manual for her making the decision, and it might be that you don't use that, you still send them from inside of Sage, but there is a setting whereby the moment it's approved, it will automatically email that to the supplier. Me personally, I probably wouldn't switch it on because I might be front loading POs, but we've got a lot of clients use that setting because it just streamlines their process. So goods receiving, you could goods receive in Sage, or we have that option within Sicon Approvals. As I say, you don't have to. So for many of you probably don't use that functionality, but for me, that's how our system's configured. So I come in here, I find the PO that I want to receive. Sage requires a document number, so we just mirror that. And at this point, I can say, well, okay, actually, I've received one of the espresso machines and 3 of the cups. You've also got some other options as well. It could be that I've received everything, or this tick box up here. Again, you can switch this off. So for some customers, perhaps it could be call off orders, or in this example here, the supplier says, well, fortunately, it's an end of line. We can only get 3 cups and we can only get 1 machine. So we're not going to receive anything else on this particular order. If I were to tick that box, once I click on save, it will then adjust the quantities both in Sage and on the and in approvals as well. So it just keeps things nice and tidy. I'm just going to part receive today. And if I save that, that's completed. And if I go back into Sage and I just view my PO, show quantities, you can see now that that's updated the receipt. Now at this point, some stage the invoice is going to come in, and as I mentioned earlier, many of you, if you're using Sage's PO process already, will find the PO and you'll record the invoice. But what I want to touch on is Sicon Documents, specifically document automation. So Sicon Documents, there's the core documents and then the automation that sits on top. So you've got scan and view only licenses, which you attach to your Sage users. So a user with a scan and view license would be able to scan or attach documents to invoices, for example, but we've got buttons throughout the system as well as view only attachments. The view only user can't do the indexing, but they can view them. When you purchase the document automation module and then your bundles, any user with that scan and view license can then start to process these through without them needing to key anything in. Now, in preparation of today, I actually sent to a unique email address an example invoice for that specific PO number today. So luckily nobody got in and took that 4110. But we do have a document drop where you could actually just drag and drop your invoices onto the system. So because I've emailed it in, I'm simply going to come into process invoices. I'm going to refresh the screen, and that's now pulling from my email into here. And we can see I've got a couple waiting, but this is the one that I sent up earlier. But it's telling me it needs attention. But if I just revalidate everything, it's actually valid. So what's happened here? Well, what it's done is it's read the information off the PDF invoice, which we can see on the right hand side. And it's matched to a series of sort of validations that we've got. So I've told the system that for Ernie Swinton, we'll always have a PO. We do goods received, so match that. But I've also switched on line level extraction as well. Now, there is a need to train each of the invoices, and this one's already been trained, but you can do training on here. And literally, it's just a case of saying, well, that's the invoice number. And once you've trained 2 or 3 invoices, then in most scenarios, the system's happy, but you might do some ongoing training. But we can do things like line level extraction now, which is great for those of you who want to match lines like I've just done here. If I go to the validation, you can see all the things it's checking. So things like it's happy it's found the supplier. It's happy that it appears to be an invoice. It's happy that there aren't any duplicate references. So we do that check as well. It's checking validation. We're not looking for a second reference. It's happy that the date's been read and in the correct format, the net, the tax and the total match, and then the individual lines. And the idea behind this is you'll never get 100% fit because there'll always be ones that you need to deal with. But hopefully over time, once you've done some training, you'll have a number of these which are sat ready to go, and you can just select them all and actually just push them through, and it will process. So what it will do is it will do the matching, and we'll see this in a moment. It will do all the matching, and it will attach a copy of the document. So a real time saver for you. There's a lot more to it, say in terms of the training, other bits that we can do. We can actually read a customer's PO and create a sales order now with the functionality, and we can handle credits as well as they come through. And as I say, the option to either email it in, which I did, so I've got a unique email address and we can see the body of the email here, or simply drag and drop them out of your email as well. So at this point, there's my invoice. If I wanted to, I could right mouse click. I could actually drill down and view the order. I could view the supplier if I needed to. I can even edit the document if there's a little tweak that I need to make. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to automatically process that through. But actually, just before I do just want to show you, if I go through on the manual option, just wanted to show you here where you do have the option to be able to manually process this through. And for the system, you can see it's read all of the details there and start to match them off. But I could just automatically, it would do this. So what I'll do is I'll just say, okay, the quantity that needs to be invoiced. So just by ticking this, there's one of those, and I'm going to tick down here, going to tick there and tick. So again, I'm doing this manually, and it may well be that you're not using line level and you've part received. Again, it just depends on how you're using the system. But right, without me having to tick anything, I'm just going to accept and post. So this pop-up, again, it's a setting within our system. So where you've got Sicon Approvals installed, you'll have an approvals add-ons file inside of Sage 200. And this is just a setting which, if there's any variance, it will pop up and I can add some comments. But I've also got it set up that if there isn't a variance, I could add something in it just to say, yeah, I'm happy with that. Again, you can switch that off. But without me having to key anything in, the system is now posting that through. Now, because I've done this manually, it's going to bring up Sage's next screen. And what we can see is it's read the details off the invoice. We've got all of our values, but there's two things I want to point out. The first one is the narrative here. Now, in standard Sage, all you would get is up to the end of the /. But with Sicon Approvals installed, there's a setting which can pull down the description line from the purchase order and put it into the narrative here. So again, it just means that your nominal reporting's just a bit more granular. And again, for those of you who currently manually type that in, that's a nice time saving. The other one that I want to point out is this tick box. Now, this requires authorization as a standard Sage 200 feature. So you need to switch on Sage's invoice authorization. And I can untick this because I've set it that anything below £1,500, I can choose whether or not it goes out for approval. Most customers set that to a penny when they're utilizing Sicon Approvals, especially the invoice approval solution. You'll also need to set up a nominal. Typically, it's a balance sheet nominal, which basically will get parked to this unauthorized nominal, which means it won't appear on your suggested payments run whilst it's being approved. So again, for some of you, this will be a slightly different mindset. So as I described earlier, paper-based invoice comes in, or it might be an email-based invoice, and we see it all the time. You print it out, and then it goes around the office. And then once you've got it approved, you will then key in the invoice. We do it the other way around. So you've got the invoice on the system, so there's no chance of it being missed, but it's parked as unauthorized to say, so it's not going to appear on the suggested payments run. So it's just flipping that process round. So I'm going to click on save. Without me having to key anything, that invoice is posted. And if I refresh, that's now disappeared. And obviously, if I had any more, that would then be pulled down. So a huge time saving. Our largest customer at the moment, they're processing over 125,000 invoices using this alongside the requisitions and the invoice approvals process as well. So they've been able to really streamline their processes. So what's actually happened? Well, first things first, my purchase order here is actually not complete. You can still see it's live, and that's because I've only part received it. So again, just working in conjunction with Sage, and we can see the invoice has been matched. If I go to my purchase ledger, we look for Ernie Swinton, again, we can show you then what's actually happened in the system here. But there's my invoice with the date. There's the query flag of unauthorized. And I've actually got two documents, and I'll come back to that in just a moment, because if I go down to the nominal, this is what I was saying earlier. This is my unauthorized purchases balance sheet nominal that I set up earlier. And that's where it's parked. And as I say, whilst it's in query, it just won't appear on the suggested payments run. But why have I got two documents? Well, I only had a one-page invoice. So what's going on here? Well, If I come down and click on my view documents, for those of you who will have been eagle-eyed, obviously when I attached the justification to my requisition, when that got approved, that attachment also then attached itself to the purchase order. So I've got two documents here, and if I click on two documents, there's my purchase invoice, but there's, do you remember it was the barcodes? There's the attachment against that. So again, just wanted to get across that it's not just, the attachments don't just have to be purchase invoice. Typically, that's what it's going to be used. That's what document automation's for. But we are able to attach documents in a number of different areas. And what I really like here is I can open it and print it, but retrospectively, if I click on email, then all I need to do is, so I've got this access piece here, but it will open up if I'm using Outlook, for example, and there's the attachment for me to email it to Richard, for example. So what's happened now? Well, Sicon Approvals is polling, it's looking for any of those unauthorized invoices, it's picked it up and it's looked at the approval route and it sent it to the appropriate approver. Now, the approval routes to invoice approvals are different to requisitions. Got the same options, so typically by nominal, as we spoke about before, you can have the multi-level with approval value. We could just do it based on value, supplier, etc. But it is a different approval route because often it might just go to, you might skip a couple of levels and it just goes to somebody senior. There's also a couple of settings that are on. Now, the argument often it is, well, we've approved the PO, we've received it, and the invoice matches what we've received and what we've previously approved. So why do I need to approve it again? It's a fair comment. So we've got a setting which will automatically authorize it. So it will still come out for approval, but if everything matches, it will then fire it back as approved. We've also got a tolerance, so you could say anything inside 1% or £5, as long as it's inside that tolerance, again, just automatically approve it. And it'll just put the variance to a variance nominal. We're quite happy with that because it might be delivery charges, but that's within our acceptable domain. Anything outside of that must go for approval. So again, the rules are still the same. Our user Corey receives an email, he logs in. If Corey comes down to invoices, see there's 31 that he needs to approve, but there at the top is the invoice. So at this point we can see second reference is the PO number, there's the invoice number there as well. Over budget, there's an attachment and we can see the lines on it. And as we expand, first screen I see will be the invoice. So again, we can give a visual to the approver. You don't need any extra document user licenses, providing you've attached it using Sicon Documents, then we can view that. The user in approvals can view that attachment. If we look at the lines, again, we've got the details on the lines themselves. We've got this edit button as well. Now you can switch this off, but for those of you who have instances where we post an invoice, or the reason it goes round as well on the bit of paper is we don't know the specific nominal that Richard wants it coded to. So what we can do is we can still go through the same process, but actually we can allow Richard to edit. So as long as you picked a nominal that you know would go to Richard, he could edit it, and from his truncated list of nominals, he could actually make a change. And then once it's fully approved, it will credit the unauthorized nominal and debit whatever that finished nominal is. Now, obviously, I'm looking at invoices that are matched to a PO. If it's just straight invoices to the ledger, again, it can go through that same approval. I can see the notes. I've got my budgets here as well. And I mentioned that I was going to show you the nominal budgets. As I click on this, for this particular nominal, we can see within there, say the month, year to date, the annual, we can see what budget we've set, the actual costs in this current financial year, anything sat in deferred, the value of any Sage purchase orders that have yet to be completed, but then you've got the value of any pending approvals or pending invoices. So we give them a real-time view of where the budget is at that point in time. So again, for a number of our clients where they get a lot of requests for where am I with my budget, this is a fantastic utility, especially if we open up functionality to allow that person then to see in read-only form those transactions for their particular budget. So again, the actual transactions, the Sage purchase orders as well. Again, if it's not relevant, you can just simply switch that off. Approval history, as it goes through for approvals, we can view that as well. We can even drill down to the invoice and actually go back to the matched requisition if we wanted to. Now, at this point, we've got a couple of other options. So again, I can still approve or reject individual lines or the whole thing. And it will still ask me for a reason, but this time it stays inside approvals. So you would set up a default rejection route, typically somebody in the purchasing department, who can then change the nominal, they can redirect the approval route. Alternatively, we've got this hold invoice. So again, nothing's going to happen inside of Sage. That's just going to remain the same. But in the example where the invoice should be for £100, but it's come through for £1,000, it might be that I need to speak to the supplier. So what I can do is I can enter a hold reason. I can hold the invoice, but I can also then notify the users that I need to speak to the supplier. Whilst it's on hold, it will put a tick box over here. And then when the credit comes in, and again, we can read the credit via document automation, that gets posted because it should be the same nominals, comes with the same approval route. At that point, when I open up a credit in the invoices on hold screen, I can then find the appropriate invoice and approve both, and it would then flow through that way. I'm just going to simply approval. Again, as before, it can go through multi-level. That's all fine until such time as it's been fully approved. And if I just refresh this and I look back at my transaction inquiry, my query flag has been removed. And there's our credit debit with our narrative, as I spoke about before. And that would be ready to appear on the appropriate suggested payments run. Doesn't just stop there, though. There's also functionality to help the finance team within Sage. So I mentioned that you're going to have an approvals folder in Sage, and there's a couple of options. So in the settings, things like the use extended pop narrative, that's the setting that I was talking about earlier, but there's others that we can switch on. But for those of you who there's a lot of invoices and it's not going to be possible to get them all approved before you do your period end, then you're going to have to accrue for those. So we've actually developed this reversing journal. So any invoices sat that are unauthorized, set a journal date, reversing date, give it a title. We can send it to a held journal before it posts. But essentially, credit, debit, debit, credit. It just means you can do your month-end routines. The other bit of functionality, and possibly one of my favorites within this, is the sign-off of your suggested payments run. Now, as I often say, I didn't really understand why, because I was like, well, you've approved the invoices, they're posted, it's ready to go. But a lot of our clients, the FD, the managing director, CEO, whoever it is, wants to sign off payment run before it goes through. Now, the challenge you've got is all of this, there's been no bits of paper flowing around. I've requested the requisition remotely. That's created a PO, and then we've emailed out the PO to the supplier. We've had a PDF invoice come in, which we've processed through, and then we've attached the PDF. That's then gone back out to approvals, and then digitally we've approved it. But if you were to run Sage's suggested payments run, as we all know, period end routines, as we all know, once we generate that, then there's a report. You print off the report, and there is where it falls down. Well, they want to see a copy of the invoice, so now you're going to have to print off all the invoices. So what we've done is within approvals, when you generate the suggested payments run, that can come out to approvals. And in this instance, I've got a user called Suzanne. Now there's two options for the approval routes, either value or supplier. I think mine's set up by value. And again, it's gone through to a user called Suzanne. But actually, what Suzanne can do is she can sign off the suggested payments run. So we can see all the details here. And as I start to just expand, we can see the invoice, the outstanding value, but we can now see a copy of that invoice, but also if I click down and view the details, the amend suggested payment screen that you've got within Sage 200, we could do the same thing here. So we can say, well, actually, we're going to part pay that one. We're not going to pay this one. But inside of Sage, until such time as this has been approved, if we try to pay those suppliers using the generate payment screen, the system's not going to allow us. So that's the kind of the purchase to pay process end to end in terms of the various different touch points. I did allude at the start, just before we open to any questions, I did allude about this option for project requisitions. So what is that? Well, if I log back in as Sandra, what does this add? Well, this is kind of pre-requisitions. So the way the system works is project requisition will go through to typically somebody in procurement, as I said, to approve, and then it will split off into the appropriate number of requisitions. But this is perfect for, as I said, those of you where your users know what they need, but they don't care about the price. They don't really care where we're going to buy it from. That's not, they don't know anything about nominals or anything like that. It's just we want to make it as easy as possible. So in this scenario, we can add stock items again or free text item lines on there. I can enter a description, but I can leave the price and the supplier blank. I don't have to pick either of those. I could have 20 lines on there, but when I submit it, it would then go for approval. And I'll see if I've got an example here. Corey. It would go to Corey. There's an example that I prepared earlier, who can then enter the price. They can phone round, get the best price from a supplier, but they can pick the supplier, they can enter the price. And then once they approve it, it will then split into the requisition and go down the requisition approval route. So it's just that extra layer. And as I say, for a good number of our clients, that's absolutely perfect, because again, we're utilizing technology, but it gives them that layers of control. And it also works culturally with their employees who just, they need it. They're not interested in the lower level detail. So a bit of a whistle stop tour today. And to end that purchase to pay, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more settings, and certainly I would recommend, if you're interested in this, speaking with Richard or Darren at EBS and arranging appropriate demonstration. But hopefully that gives you a bit of a feel for that process. But I guess back over to yourself, Richard or Darren. Are there any questions in the chat?
Brilliant stuff. Thanks ever so much, Steve. Yeah, it's great to see it, isn't it, from end to end, and just quite how powerful that this can be. I've not seen any questions coming in myself. Obviously, if there are any questions that anybody has off the back of the demonstration, feel free to reach out to any of us here at EBS. Be more than happy to answer those for you. And equally, Steve and the team, I'm sure you'd be happy to jump on another call if necessary and do a bit more of a detailed demonstration. But if nobody's got anything else to add, thanks ever so much, Steve. It's a long one to go through in terms of what needs to be shown, so I appreciate that. And yeah, we'll be doing more webinars over the next few weeks. So keep an eye out on our website and social media channels. And yeah, speak to everybody soon. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, everybody.